Are you ready? Okay, we had some questions this week, and I will spend the first few minutes answering questions, okay? And then we'll get into the book. Okay, the first question is about homeschooling. And there is a big issue with homeschooling. This is the biggest issue that everyone always brings up. Socialization. The student writes that every time he mentions homeschooling, the person he is speaking to says, "That's a bad idea because the children will not be socialized. They will not know how to relate to adults. They will not know how to relate to children. They will be socially awkward." And then they go on to say, and this really gets me, they say, the purpose of education is not just to teach, well, let me see, 1 second. The main objective of school is not to teach, or better, not to impose subjects like mathematics, history, language, etc. But the main objective of school is to integrate children into society. So I would like to answer two parts of this question. First, socialization. In the United States, we have had homeschooling for about 20 years. In the 1980s, homeschooling was illegal almost everywhere in the United States. I personally knew some people who were homeschooling their 4 children, and they had to run away from the police. And they eventually had to move out of our state, which is Virginia, to the next state over, West Virginia, to live, so that the state would not arrest them for not putting their children in school. That is how it was in America 20 years ago. And over the 10, 20 years that followed, homeschooling has become legal in all 50 states. And right now, nearly everybody in America has met a homeschooled child. Maybe they know someone who homeschools. Now, these children that have been homeschooled are so well socialized that today no one in America can say that children who are homeschooled are not socialized. In English, we have an idiom. We have a phrase. The phrase is, "The proof is in the pudding." Now, pudding is a kind of American dessert. It's sweet and creamy and delicious. And if you put in something bad, It will taste bad. It is easy to ruin a pudding. It is tricky to make it. But if you make it right, it will be good. So, if the pudding is good, you know the person made it right. You don't have to watch a person make the pudding. You only have to eat it afterwards. If it is good, you know they did it right. The proof that will show that the person made it correctly is in the pudding itself. It is in the result. Now, with homeschooling, you do not need to ask a question, will they be socialized? The proof is in the pudding. The children who have been raised with homeschooling are so superior in their socialization that people cannot question it anymore. However, people do question this still because they think in their mind it is impossible for a child to be socialized if he stays home. So they think the proof is in the logic. Obviously, a child who is at home will not learn to deal with adults, children, and other age mates. However, the fact is, the truth is, the proof is in the pudding. It works. And sociologists have told us why it works. So now we know why it works. In the United States, children are put in school based on their age, not based on their intelligence or their level of study. If a child is 8 years old, on a certain date, September 1st, 8 years old on September 1st, he is in the 3rd grade, period. If he is slow in developing and cannot read, too bad, 3rd grade. If he is bright and early and you taught him to read when he was 3 and he now wants to read advanced stories, doesn't matter, 3rd grade. 8 years old, 3rd grade. Everybody in the 3rd grade is 8 years old. And you have about 30 children to one teacher. And the children stay with their own age mates for 12 years, from 13 years, kindergarten to college. They stay with those same kids. And they don't really even spend much time with their parents. Usually they come home, they watch television, or they go out and play with other 8-year-olds. The only people they play with are 8-year-olds. This is a bad strategy for socialization. Children in America tend to ignore persons who are older or persons who are younger. Those persons, older and younger, do not exist in their world. They do not learn how to relate to adults because they never relate to adults. They do not learn how to relate to younger children because they never relate to younger children. In homeschooling, the children spend only a few hours a day studying with their parents. The rest of the time, they are interacting with other homeschoolers who have large families with younger children and babies going up to older children. So they have all ages of children, and also with the adults, because homeschool children frequently go to work with their parents and they spend a great amount of time with adults, being mentored. Also, they work at a young age in a responsible job. As soon as they are tall, they can work. So it makes good logical sense that a homeschooler will be well socialized. It is not true that homeschoolers stay home and never see people. They have more interaction with people than the children in school who are in an age-segregated ghetto. Age-segregated ghetto. A ghetto is a place where people of one type are isolated. They congregate and they're isolated and they can't get out. That's a ghetto. It's a place where one type of person is confined. In America, children in school live their whole life in an age-segregated ghetto, whereas if they were homeschooled, they would be with all ages, interacting actively for most of every day of their lives. So that is why homeschoolers are better socialized than their age-segregated school peers. Now, the second thing about this question that I want to address briefly is the idea that school, I want to get this right. I'm going to get it right from the paper. The main objective of school is not to teach, or better, not to impose. Not to teach, or better, not to impose, subjects like math, science, and language. The main objective of school. This is what the people who are against homeschooling said. The main objective of school is not to teach, or better, not to impose math, science, and language, but rather, let's see how they put it, to integrate children into society. To integrate children into society. This is what is happening in the United States. In the United States, our public schools very commonly, not 100%, but very commonly, are not successful in imposing math, science, and language on anybody. But they are very successful in integrating children into society, by which they mean making all of the children the same. And I don't know how to describe it. They do not think, they do not function at a high level. They are all the same. I don't know how to explain it, but the outcome is not good. Also, the classes are very propagandistic. They have laws in the United States saying that every subject, math, science, language, every subject at every level, from kindergarten through the 12th grade, must teach homosexuality. Every subject, you must teach homosexuality in math, science, and language. They want to teach children to accept homosexuality as normal and good. So, mathematics, science, language, everything, you must include tolerance for homosexuality from kindergarten through 12th grade. So they have children's books. Sally Has Two Mommies, that they must use for reading time in kindergarten to fulfill the requirement that every subject at every level must include instruction on tolerance for homosexuality. Also, my daughter, who is in college at a very well-respected school, came home after 2 years and she said, it is amazing how every subject finds a way to teach evolution as fact. Evolution is in every subject at college. They find a way. So this is to show that the schools are propagandistic. They are propaganda machines. They are trying to mold the children so that they will integrate into society, which is just a way of saying they are brainwashing them. And I say, and all the other homeschoolers say, that it is the job of parents to train a child so that they're prepared to integrate into society. Right now, I am teaching my 15-year-old son how to manage money because he recently got a job tutoring English to college students who came from the public school. And he gets a paycheck. He got his first paycheck and he went to the bank and opened an account and put the money in. And he came home and I said to him, now we must download some accounting software for your computer so that you can handle your budget. And he was like, what? And I said, every time you write a check, you put it into your accounting software. When it is time to deposit your paycheck, you set aside your 10% tithe to God. We talked about whether to give to the church or to other charities or to keep it in an account that would grow so that when a need comes through, he will have money of God's to give. And we talked about budget categories. I told him how to keep the receipts in his wallet and bring them home and input them. How to keep his checks, 3 checks at a time in his wallet. We talked about it. He is learning. I am teaching my son to integrate into society. It is my responsibility. And I am doing it. I don't need the school to teach my children to integrate into society. Parents need to do that. So that's my response to the points that were brought up by this. The second question, which I'll deal with very quickly, I liked very much. I like the homeschooling one too, don't get me wrong, I like that one too. But I liked this one because it is about another book. It's about 1984 by George Orwell. The student is reading 1984, and he had a couple of questions about some phrases. And I'll answer them quickly, but what I want to say is reading a book like that is a good thing. This is exactly what the course is about. This is what Olavo is doing in his spare time. He is reading English literature because he believes in the book we are studying, which says you must read broadly in the literature of a language which has a rich and subtle vocabulary. And as you read broadly the great literature, you will be exposed to very major experiences that the characters encounter, life-changing, huge experiences, and you will have the opportunity to broaden your own heart. Your own heart will expand with the character. As they learn lessons, you will learn the lessons, even though you don't have to suffer what the character suffers. So I was excited that the student is reading this book. And I will tell you what the questions were. Okay, in one question, hold on. Okay, in one question, the main character wants to sit down at a table in the cafeteria with a girl, and he wants to speak to her alone. But as he is carrying his tray to the table, another man also carries his tray going toward the same seat. And the words are, with ice at his heart, Winston followed. Okay, the phrase is, with ice at his heart. First, I want to give you a pronunciation tip. You probably know the pronunciation of I, when it is followed by a silent E, is what we call the long vowel sound, and it says the letter's name, I. However, in this case, we do not pronounce it eyes. If you say eyes, it will sound like this word. Eyes, which means your eyes. When you're pronouncing the word that means ice, we pronounce it ice. It is as though it started with a U. Ice. This is a little known pronunciation quirk. Most Americans don't know, they only do it. And if you don't do it, they will not understand you. And they will not know why. But it'll sound like this to them. Ice, not ice. Ice. Eyes. I believe, but I am not sure, that this would be the case anytime it's followed by the s sound, or even the f sound. So if you know the word sibilant, 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 the sorry. Okay. All right. I don't want to knock it off again. Can you still see it? Okay, it looks like you can still see it. All right. Got it? Wait. Heart. I want to make sure the whole thing shows. Okay. The sibilant consonants will have this quirk when they follow a long I. So, for example, in the word life, life. If you do not say if, it will sound like live. It will sound like this word, live, as opposed to life. So when we have this is what we call a voiced consonant. A voiced consonant, life, yeah, live. We say it with its full long sound, lie, and we lengthen it a bit. Live, life, live, life. Do you see how when it is followed by a sibilant, the vowel quality changes and the vowel itself is shortened? So that is how, so it goes life, live. It's about twice as long in time. So, ice. With ice at his heart, he followed. Comma, he followed. The student asked, what does it mean to have ice at your heart? I believe, actually, this is not a common phrase. This author used it as a description, and I think the reader can surmise, get an idea from the context out of his own imagination of how the guy felt with ice at his heart. But I think it's usually ice would be cold, cold heart. Usually means the opposite of warm. Warm means open, happy, affectionate. It's an open thing. Whereas cold is closed and retiring and negative. So it could mean almost angry, bitter, but I don't really think so. This context to me makes me think it simply means with disappointment and almost like hopelessness. That's what I think. But I am imagining from the context. I'm not sure. Okay? There's one other question similar to this about 1984, which I do know the answer to. And what the student thought it meant is not right, for sure. This whiteboard is harder to erase than the one at Alessandra's house. This is my whiteboard. It's very cheap. This is the board I used to teach my children. Okay. The other one has the guy and his girlfriend out in the fields. And it says, the air seemed to kiss one's skin. The air seemed to kiss one's skin. Now, the student thought maybe it meant it's windy. Definitely not. Windy means lots of wind. If it's windy, you can see the hair go. You know, the leaves are blowing. Windy means gusts of wind. Windy is extreme. The air seemed to kiss one's skin. Kissing is like, it's like what a mother would do to a baby who was asleep. And if the mother kisses a baby who is asleep, she doesn't even wake him up. It is almost imperceptible sweetness. So I would say the air seemed to kiss one's skin means it is not windy. The air is very still and very sweet. And if there is the slightest breath of breeze, and it will seem to kiss your skin with a momentary coolness, a momentary sweetness. So that's that. Now, we are a little bit over time on questions, so I'm going to get to the book. And I actually have a couple of questions about the book to launch us into it. All right, let's see. There was one question that said that the person did not get the idea of social sciences as sorcery. Social sciences as sorcery. The student asked, what does he mean by sorcery? Now, sorcery is witchcraft. But in this case, it doesn't mean Wicca. You know, Wicca. And it does not mean actual witches with a cauldron and spells and stir up the potion and wearing a black hat, fly on a broomstick. It doesn't mean witchcraft like that. It means a sort of procedure which relies on magic, because whatever they're doing has no basis in science. So in this case, it could mean essentially unscientific. So when they say social sciences, as sorcery, what he is saying is the social scientists are pulling their ideas out of the air as if by magic. They are not getting them through scientific means. There is no proof, there is no logic, there's no scientific approach to make their findings legitimate. It is about as legitimate as someone who can turn metal into gold. I can make gold out of iron. That would be sorcery. Or maybe I can discern the future from the stars. Or I can read the future by tea leaves. You know, this is sorcery. This is not science. Okay? So that's what that means. All right, let's see. I think that may be Hold on. I thought I had another one, but maybe I don't. Okay. Oh, there was one more. There was one more. Someone had a question about the phrase done as a period cult. Period cult. On page 25, he says something about that. Or maybe it's 24. Oh no, 23. And the new in literature presented as done a period cult. By the way, he's really pronounced done. Done. It looks like dawn, but it's really pronounced done. Okay, a period cult. And the student said, what is a period cult? Remember, on page 23, the idea was that practical criticism was only applicable to the period of time when T.S. Eliot was writing, when Eliot and Donne were writing, okay, James Joyce. It was about the 1920s. For that period, the 1920s, practical criticism was applicable. That's what the professor at Cambridge said. Well, Donne, a period cult. Cult means a group of followers. People, usually it means a religious movement, like the Sun Myung Moon, or the Jehovah's Witnesses, or something like that, a religious group. But it can also mean a group that groups around an author or a book. There was a cult of the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, a cult of Star Trek. That's a TV show that we had in America a few years back. It developed a following. So a period cult means that during a certain period of time, a lot of people were banding together to read and discuss and follow the works of Donne. So that's what period cult. If that's not clear, ask again and I'll try to make it clearer. Okay, now let us move on in the book. I'm sorry, we're a little bit later than usual in starting. I have some questions from a student who read ahead. So I'm going to hit them as we come to them, and that will be very helpful. If any of you want to read ahead one paragraph and send me questions, that would be good. That would help me a lot. If we stop here and you read on one paragraph by yourself and send me questions, I'll really like that, because that will help me know what I should explain. And it will be good for you to try to read it on your own. So we'll see if any of you can send some questions. And this student did that this week and sent them to me. And usually Alessandro gives me some too, but if you do it, that'll be a very good thing. So I challenge you to try to read ahead and come up with some questions for me. But let us begin. We are on page 25 at the bottom of the extended quotation. See, there is an extended quotation from Science as Sorcery. We just finished there, and I will begin. Now, let us try to remember what we were talking about. Hold on, I'm scanning it myself. Okay. In the quote that we studied at the end of last class, Professor Andreski was criticizing the culture. He was finding fault with the culture of his discipline, the Department of Social Sciences at his college. He was not necessarily criticizing all of English culture, but specifically what was happening in his field, which was social sciences. Okay? And he said that most of the people did not think for themselves. Most of the people evaluated ideas based on the stature of the person who first propounded the idea. They didn't consider the idea on its own merits. They only followed a personality. But, he said, there are always a few, one or two, out of 10 or 20, who like to think, even if they are not being paid. Now, being paid doesn't only mean money. It means prestige, honor. For example, if I am in a college and everybody is saying that man developed from an ape, and I don't believe it, but I will say it just to toe the line so that they will promote me, give me tenure, give me a professorship, more money, more honor. Finally, I'm head of the department, and still I am saying man developed from a monkey, and I don't believe it. That is a person who thinks only for pay. But there are people, still a very small minority, who think because of the love of truth. And because of those people, human knowledge moves forward. And he also said that good ideas retain their value. They are cumulative and retain their value. And the hope of humanity is in this small minority of people who will think without the desire for gain. They will come up with good ideas which will hold their value even if the person is shunted aside or crucified or fired from their job or blacklisted. These ideas will hold their value. So that is what Andreski says in Social Sciences as Sorcery. Now we pick up with Levis commenting on Andreski's quote. I'll begin to read at the bottom paragraph, page 25. The book is a valuable one for my purpose, and I recommend it to the minority who find or make openings for the kind of opportunism on which hope in the university depends. I'm going to continue reading more of the paragraph, but then we'll come back and talk about each sentence. It is a conclusive commentary on Lord Robin's faith in the social sciences and psychology, and it has close bearing on the concern that explains my emphasis on distinctive discipline and the living principle which this serves. I think that the evidence he presents is even more alarming than he recognizes, but at least he gives one the opportunity to insist with renewed point on the greater menace which he doesn't consider before committing himself to his exhortation. Anyway, let us not despair. Okay, let us start at the beginning. I had a question from the student who read ahead. He asked the question, what is the difference between the phrase, the book is a valuable one, for my purpose, and the book is valuable for my purpose? I want to say that there really is no difference. They are simply alternative constructions. There's no functional difference at all. Obviously, valuable is an adjective, and a valuable one is an adjectival phrase. But they're both the same. Functionally, they're exactly the same. Okay? Good question. Excellent question. Okay, so the book is valuable, is the point he is making, for his purpose. What is Levis's purpose? Levis is trying to evidence or make plain, exhibit the fact that society is falling apart and that intellectually we are losing our edge. Okay, that is Levis's purpose. And Levis's purpose also is to provide a prescription of sorts of what a good-hearted person and a right-thinking person can do to oppose and counter the problem. But, okay, so the book is valuable. Social sciences as sorcery is valuable for Levis's purpose. And I recommend it. That means he thinks you should read it. To the minority who find or make openings for the kind of opportunism on which hope in the university depends. Okay. Levis recommends the book to who? To whom? I recommend the book, so he thinks you should read it, to who? Okay, now we have a complicated phrase. The minority, keywords, minority, that means it is not most people. The mass audience will not appreciate this book. It's not for mass reading, it's for a few people, selected. The minority who find or make openings. So, modifying minority, it is the people who find or make openings. Openings here means opportunities. They find openings, or they make them. Openings for what? For the kind of opportunism on which hope in the university depends. Okay? So, the minority who find or make openings for what? For opportunism What kind of opportunism? The kind on which hope in the university depends. So, hope in the university depends on opportunism, which is students, faculty, financiers, people in the boards of government who want to effect change. People take their opportunities or make them to effect change. On this, all hope depends. If people do not make opportunities to effect change, then there will be no hope for the university. The university will go down. So, this book, Social Sciences as Sorcery, is very crucial in Levis's idea, just like Levis is crucial in Olavo's idea for you. Levis is saying to his students, Andreski is a good book to read because you're the people who might be able to make a change. And if you can't do it, there's no hope. Okay? So he is recommending the book to the minority of people, very few, who will find or make opportunities to do something about it, to change things in a way which will retrieve the university. Okay. All right. The book is a valuable one for my purpose. It's valuable because he can hand it to the minority and they'll read it and that will empower them. His purpose is to get people who will do something. And this Andreski book can empower them. Okay. The book is a valuable one for my purpose, says Levis, and I recommend it to the minority who find or make openings for the kind of opportunism on which hope in the university depends. It is a conclusive commentary on Lord Robin's faith in the social sciences and psychology. It is a conclusive commentary. What does conclusive mean, and why does he use it? Conclusive. Conclusive means decisive. Conclusive means decisive. It means leading one to decide or conclude or come to a conclusion. Reach a conclusion. So a conclusive argument closes the book. It's the final word. It's enough. You have proved your point. QED. That is short for a Latin phrase, which means that which had to be proved is proved. It's used for proof in logic. So, conclusive commentary. Andreski's book is a conclusive commentary on Lord Robin's faith in the social sciences and psychology. Now, Lord Robbins, if you remember a few pages back, on page 20, Levis was very upset, very exercised, and astonished and shocked that Lord Robbins could make the statement that the natural sciences must be complemented by the study of human nature by means of the social sciences rather than by means of the study of literature. Lord Robbins had more faith in the social sciences than he had in literature to shed light on human nature. And Levis was just crazy up in arms on that. Well, Andreski's book blasts the social sciences as sorcery. He is saying the social sciences have no undergirding. They have no support. The social sciences may as well be astrology. You know, they're not science. They're unscientific. So Andreski writes a whole book to document and prove that the social sciences are adrift with no anchor. And this is the conclusive commentary on Lord Robins's faith in social sciences. It's not grounded on anything secure. Okay? So, let's see. Andreski's book, It, is a conclusive commentary on Lord Robins' faith in the social sciences and psychology. And it, Andreski's book, has a close bearing on the concern that explains my emphasis on distinctive discipline. Okay. Andreski's book, every time it says it means Andreski's book. All the its are Andreski's book. It has a close bearing on what? The concern that explains my emphasis on distinctive discipline. Okay. It has a close bearing on the concern. A close bearing on the concern. Okay. If something has a close bearing on something else, it means it is related closely. It just means it is relevant. It is closely concerned with or closely connected to the concern that explains my emphasis the concern that explains my emphasis. Andreski's book has a close bearing on the concern that explains Levis's emphasis on the distinctive discipline. The concern means the thing I am worried about, the subject of my book, the subject of my thought and my anxiety, my fears, my hopes. The concern, Levis's concern, is that society is losing its intellectual moorings, intellectual anchorage, intellectual underpinning. So Levis's concern is that society is becoming cretinized, stupidified. Okay, that's Levis's concern. And Andreski's book has a close bearing on Levis's concern. The concern that explains Levis's emphasis. As if we must explain why is Levis so worried, it is because of this concern. Why does he emphasize English as a distinctive discipline, English as the living principle? Why does he emphasize that over and over? It's because of this concern. The concern explains it. The concern explains why Levis emphasizes over and over that English is a distinctive discipline. The distinctive discipline. Levis emphasizes over and over that English is a distinctive discipline. It's a discipline in that it is something which trains you, something which molds you, something which shapes you. It is like playing scales on the piano 1,000,000 times for 8 years while you are taking lessons, and before you know it, when you go to play, your fingers cannot play the wrong note, because for 8 years you have engaged in the discipline of scales and arpeggios. Okay? English is a distinctive discipline. Now, it's a discipline in that it trains you and creates a thinking human being who has an expanded heart and expanded morally and expanded intellectually. Okay? It's a discipline. However, distinctive. What's distinctive mean? Hold on. Distinctive means it is peculiar. It is the only one of its kind. It is unique. It is unlike other disciplines. It is unique because it is primary. It is foundational. Everything else, academic and intellectual, builds upon a broad and subtle understanding of English or a broad, rich language. If you do not have mastery of a rich literary language and tradition, you will not be sufficiently developed to engage in the highest form of thought. So, it is unique in that it is primary. It is language. Obviously, a child must learn language before he can read, and he must read before he can study anything else. The study of language is primary even in human development. It is also primary in brain development. There are studies that have been done of children who were language deprived for a period of time in their formative years. And those children end up mentally retarded if they do not get language input by the age of 6 or 7. Their brain will never develop normally. They will be retarded all their lives because language, the mother tongue, is the operating language of the brain. So language is literally primary. Literally primary. You say literally primary, as well as figuratively primary. Literally primary. Language is literally primary in the development of the brain in young children. If you do not have language, you will be mentally retarded. It is also figuratively primary, but not really figuratively. It's literally in a different way. It's literally in a different way. It's not figuratively primary. It's also literally primary to academic pursuit. You really must have, to the extent that you have language, you will have your other academic pursuits. If you only have this much language, you will only have this much science, this much math at most. You might have this much science and this much math, but you will not exceed your language. The language capability is the limiting factor. If you get this much in terms of your exposure and mastery of a subtle language, then you have the potential of this much in science and the potential of this much in every field. So language is the limiting factor, and we don't simply mean grammar. We mean broad knowledge of vocabulary in its subtlety, and grammatical structures in their subtlety, and the idioms, and the everything that goes into literature, and the literature itself, because the literature itself is where you encounter life in the lives of 1,000 heroic characters. You have one life to live, but through reading, you can live 1,000 lives, all heroic. You can encounter any number of catastrophes and sorrows and trials and moral decisions, and you can see how they play out 1,000 times in books. Meanwhile, your language is ever pushing upward. And as your language pushes upward, your potential in every field becomes greater and greater. So in this case, language is primary. You might want to put it in another room. My phone is ringing and we're going to get rid of it. I always forget to turn off my phone. It's probably my daughter. Okay, so, I'm going to start at the beginning of the sentence. It is a conclusive commentary on Lord Robin's faith in the social sciences and psychology, and it, the book, Andreski's book, has a close bearing on the concern that explains my emphasis on distinctive discipline and the living principle which this serves. Okay, so end of sentence. So we were saying Andreski's book has a close bearing on Levis's mission. Wait, I've lost it. And has a close bearing on the concern that explains Levis's emphasis on distinctive discipline and the living principle it serves. So it explains Levis's emphasis on the distinctive discipline and the living principle which it serves. It refers to distinctive discipline. Okay, so it explains Levis's emphasis on the distinctive discipline of language and the living principle which it serves. Now, we have formerly tried to figure out what living principle really means, and all we have been able to deduce is that living principle is the idea that all of human thought and human intellectual and spiritual and moral progress is on a continuum from the beginning of time until now, like a tree which grows up or like a river which flows. And everybody since Adam or the first man until now has the opportunity to add to the river, to add to the circles of the tree. And it is a living, continuous body of knowledge and growth that is being continually augmented and expanded by the contributions of the current generation. So, the distinctive discipline of study language, study literature, grow, become persons of character and integrity, this serves the living principle. Because if we do not have human beings capable of thinking creatively and originally, then there will be nobody to continue to contribute to the body of knowledge. So, that's what it means. All right. So we're now on page 26. I think that the evidence he presents is even more alarming than he recognizes, but at least he gives one the opportunity to insist with renewed point on the greater menace which he doesn't consider, before committing himself to his exhortation. Anyway, let us not despair. Another long sentence. He really packs a lot into every sentence. We could make 4 or 5 short sentences out of many of his sentences. Okay. I think, i.e. Levis thinks, that the evidence he presents, evidence, what does he mean by evidence? In English, we have several meanings for evidence. The most common meaning for the word evidence comes from the courtroom, when a prisoner is on trial because he has committed a crime. The government must bring forth evidence, and they might have phone calls he made that they recorded, they might have video camera of him robbing the store, they might have eyewitness testimony, they might have letters that he wrote bragging about the crime or saying he was going to do the crime. All of this is evidence. It is data. And the evidence is used to make a case in court. So you would say, what evidence do you bring? Well, I have a phone call, a letter, a video, 3 witnesses, and the confession of the guy himself. Okay. The evidence is overwhelming. He is guilty. That's the main usage of evidence. However, we also have another use. Another use is, it means it shows something forth, or it makes it evident. It reveals something. For example, the flowers are evidence that winter is past and spring is here. So the flowers show and prove that winter is finished and spring is coming. If you make something evident, you are simply revealing it and making it clear. So I think in Levis's usage, he says, I think the evidence Andreski presents is more alarming than he recognizes. At least in the segment we read, he is not presenting evidence like in a court. He is more making observations of the nature of the interactions in his college that show forth the level of cretinization and stupidifying of everybody. So I would say he's using the word in the sense of displays, okay? He makes a display of, all right? So Levis thinks the evidence that Andreski presents is even more alarming than he recognizes, but at least he gives one. Okay, so Levis is saying that Andreski is pointing to things that are bad, and Andreski is not really too worried about it. It's like if I said, the house is falling down, and then my friend Eduardo, who is manning the technical, says, oh yeah, it is. And I said, yes, the ceiling is going to crush us. And he says, yes, it will. You know, I am saying something that is very alarming, but I am not acting scared. I am not reacting strongly enough. That is what Levis says that Andreski is doing. The evidence that Andreski is giving shows that the house is falling down, and yet Andreski is okay with it. So Levis thinks it's a bigger problem than Andreski seems to think. All right? But, okay, so Levis thinks the evidence he presents, Andreski presents, is even more alarming than Andreski recognizes. But at least he gives one, i.e. he gives a reader, the opportunity to insist with renewed point on the greater menace which he doesn't consider. Okay, so Levis is saying, Andreski is bringing forth all of this terrible, alarming evidence that points to a horrible, disastrous reality, which Andreski himself does not recognize. However, and that's bad. That is bad. However, the good thing, that's why he uses but, because now something good is coming. What was bad was first, but the good thing is when Andreski points this out, it gives me, Levis, the opportunity to insist again with renewed point on the great concern that the society is falling apart. So when he says, at least he gives one the opportunity to insist with renewed point, it's like he gives Levis a chance to say yet again what his main point is. His main point is that society is in trouble. And Andreski, publishing all of these observations, gives Levis a chance to say, yes, look at that. Remember my point. Society is falling apart. I can insist again because I can make a commentary on Andreski. Okay, so he can insist again with renewed point on the greater menace, that is, the fact that we're all gonna die. You know, if the sky were falling, we would die. That is the bigger menace, the bigger problem, the bigger danger. Okay, so he can insist again with renewed point. In other words, he can point to it again, renew his point, that there is a greater menace than Andreski is even referring to. A menace which Andreski doesn't consider, appears to be unaware of. But Levis can insist on it with renewed point before committing himself to the exhortation, anyway, let us not despair. So, in other words, Andreski gives the opportunity by saying all these bad things about society. He opens up the door for Levis to jump in and scream once again, the sky is falling, before Andreski says, so let's not despair. So it's a brief opportunity to insist with renewed point on a great menace before we agree, okay, we're not going to despair. Now, I also, when you say, anyway, let us not despair, I want to remind you of something we read earlier when Levis was telling us what attitude we should have. I'm trying to find it. It was it was an attitude that was as negative as possible without despairing. Remember? I don't see it. He said we should be something like sanguine. We are to be unsanguine but positive, I think he said. Something like that. All right. Just one sec. Okay, it's on page 21. At the end of the last full paragraph, beginning with the word here. Here we have one of the considerations that determine the attitude that, in the following pages, I assume as the right one. A non-acceptance of defeat that is as far from optimism as a positive attitude can be and remain undespairing. So, we have an attitude, say right here on the continuum is where we shift from positive, well, maybe I'll make it right in the middle. Positive, negative. And it's on a continuum. Here is despair. Here is certain hope. Okay, certain hope. It's you're really quite sure that you will succeed. And Levis says that our attitude should be basically right here. As it's a non-acceptance of defeat. Okay, so if you accept defeat, you're over here. If you know you're going to win, you're over here. So, it's not an acceptance of defeat. It's like as close as possible without becoming despair and still remaining positive. So it's the least positive possible. Least positive possible. So when Andreski says, anyway, let us not despair, and Levis says, I have my opportunity of insisting with renewed point on the greater menace, which Andreski doesn't consider, before committing himself to the exhortation, anyway, let us not despair. Levis agrees we should not despair. He will commit himself with Andreski to not despairing. It's okay with Levis to say, let us not despair. But before he says, let us not despair, he wants to insist with renewed point on the great menace that Andreski isn't really considering. Okay? So, and then Levis is willing to join Andreski in committing himself to not despairing. Well, let me just watch the time.
7:30.
Do you know when we're supposed to stop? I think usually we will. All right, let's see. Alessandro always tells us when to stop. Are you ready for a break, or do you want to go on more? Will you respond on chat? We're waiting for you to respond to whether you need a break. Or do you want to go on more? A good idea doesn't tell me whether it's good idea for a break or good idea to go on. Oh,
A little more.
okay. I think we have a few people saying go on, and one person saying break. No, 2, 3. All right, I'll tell you what. We will go on for 10 more minutes, okay? Or so. Till quarter of. All right. I'm sorry for those of you who need a break. 10 more minutes. See if you can do it. Okay, good. All right. So, we're not despairing. Now, Levis goes on to say, the process of cretinization is lethal. That means deadly, fatal, okay? The process of cretinization is lethal in a way he doesn't suggest. He means Andreski, okay? So he's back on the idea that Andreski does not understand the menace, the danger. So the process of cretinization is very widespread, much more so than Andreski knows. Actually, the mass media representing our cretinized and cretinizing civilization are working destructively with such a success that if they are not positively, which would be creatively, countered, and countered with intelligence, devoted pertinacity, and faith, will put an end to the very conditions of what he hopes to preserve. It goes on from there more to one sentence, but I'm going to stop because he just has such long sentences. So let's start at the beginning of the sentence. The process of cretinization is lethal in a way he Andreski, does not suggest. Actually, okay, now when you have the colon, it says he does not suggest colon. Okay, in a way he does not suggest colon. That thing is a colon. It means something more which will give more information about what came first. So the main idea is here, this is additional explanation, additional explanatory material. So when you see that, you know what is coming should not be new. It is more information about the main idea that has already come first. Okay? So actually, the mass media representing our cretinized and cretinizing civilization. So mass media represents the civilization itself, which is already stupid, and it also is the force making it stupid. So mass media has two identities. Mass media, TV, movies, music, newspapers, magazines, etc., art, it represents the society itself, which is stupid. The stupid society. They don't use stupid, they use cretinized society. Cretinized. But also the mass media is the agent of cretinization. Makes society stupid. So you have what we call a snowball effect. Snowball effect. A snowball effect. I don't know if where you are there is snow, but where we are we get snow sometimes. And then the kids, the children.
Question.
Oh, question. Sorry.
Yes, he asks why Levis uses he here. He thinks it refers to the process of cretinization.
Yeah, no. The process of cretin. Oh, we had a question. Sorry, I'll repeat it for you. A student has asked, why does Levis use the pronoun he in the first sentence? The process of cretinization is lethal in a way he doesn't suggest. In English, we do not use he to represent anything but people or animals. It must be a person or an animal. So the he cannot represent cretinization. It cannot represent an idea in English. We do not use masculine and feminine for ideas. We only use them for animals or people. So he is Andreski. All right? So the process of cretinization is lethal in a way that Andreski does not suggest in his book. Okay? So snowball effect, you get a snowball and the snow sticks together, put it down and start rolling it, and it gets bigger and bigger because all the snow collects, and it just gets bigger and bigger as it rolls and rolls. And that's how children get big snowballs to make a snowman. They need a big one on the bottom, a medium one in the middle, and a small one on the top. They get it by rolling, and as the ball rolls, it grabs on more and more and more. So the mass media, the society is stupid and cretinized and brutalized and horrible because of mass media, and the mass media itself reveals the state of society. You can look at mass media and see society as gross and cretinized, but also the mass media itself is causing it. So when we argue with the TV producers and say, why are you producing bad TV? They say, this is what society demands. But the question is, why does society demand it? Because they have already given it to society, and they have led the society by pushing the envelope and being more and more extreme. So is it the chicken or the egg? Who comes first? So anyway, so the mass media representing our cretinized and cretinizing civilization are working destructively. So who is working destructively? The mass media is working destructively. The mass media is working destructively with a success that, if they are not positively countered, will put an end to the conditions of what Andreski hopes to preserve. All right, I left out phrases because I'm following the skeleton of the sentence. And I will end with this sentence, with the skeleton of this sentence, and that's where we'll pick up next week. So I'll give you the skeleton of the sentence, and then you can read on your own the rest of it and maybe come up with some questions and send them to me. Okay, so it is, let's see. All right. First of all, remember, this whole thing is after a colon. So the whole thing is supporting the idea that the process of cretinization is lethal in a way that Andreski doesn't suggest. So this whole thing is shedding light on that first core sentence. Remember that. But everything after the colon, the core of that is this. The mass media with its dual identity are working destructively with a level of success okay, with, I'm going to change the words a little to give you the idea. A level of success that can destroy the conditions Andreski relies on. Okay, even that is very complicated. Even that is a difficult sentence. But this at least is a clearer sentence. The mass media are working destructively. That means the people of the mass media, the different institutions, are working destructively. So they are destroying the civilization. With a level of success, in other words, they're effectively destroying it. They're doing a good job of destroying the civilization with a level of success that can destroy the conditions Andreski relies on. Think back. What conditions did Andreski rely on? Where was Andreski's hope? Andreski's hope was in the minority who were willing to think, willing and able to think without the lure of material gain. So Andreski assumes there will always be a minority who are willing and able to think. And on those people rests the hope of the progress of humanity. Levis is saying that the operation of the mass media is chopping off the heads of society in such a way that there may not be any minority left that is capable of thinking, put aside willing, capable of contributing to the living principle, the cumulative sum total of wisdom of mankind. So, with that little introduction, I'd like to ask you to read this paragraph on your own, and if there's something you feel you don't understand, send it, and that will give me some guidance as to what to explain to you next week. So now we will stop for 5 minutes, and if you have any questions, you can send them now, and if we don't have questions, we'll stop, and if we do, we'll answer a few questions. 5-minute break now. Thank you. Okay. We don't know if anyone's listening, but we do have some questions. If you are listening, you can send a chat and tell us you're there. But we have a few questions. Okay, first, there was a question that asked about a sentence on page 25. It is in the quote, in the middle of the quote, after the word gurus, Andreski says, nevertheless, despite the advanced stage of cretinization, which our civilization has reached under the impact of the mass media, there are still people about who like to use their brains without the lure of material gain. The student asks, why does he use nevertheless and despite? Since those two phrases mean something similar, Did he just use them both for emphasis? No. They are not used just for emphasis. They have different functions in the sentence. So it's this. Nevertheless, comma. Let me make it clear this way. Before he said this sentence, he basically said that the walls of pseudoscience are manned by stout defenders who are slaves of routine, mercenary go-getters, docile educational employees. He said basically there are bad people out there. The people are bad. Nevertheless, in spite of the fact that people are bad, nevertheless, there are still people about who like to use their brains. Nevertheless, there are still good people. So you see, previously he said the people are bad, nevertheless, there are still some good people. That is this nevertheless. It is functioning to alert the reader to the fact that something contrasting is about to be said. The people are bad, educational employees, mercenary go-getters, blah, blah. Nevertheless, there are still some good. People who like to use their brains without the lure of material gain. That's this nevertheless. But inserted in here is another idea. Despite ... Despite the advanced stage of Cretanization which our civilization has reached under the impact of the mass media. Okay, so within this skeleton of the sentence, the people are bad, nevertheless there are some good people, you have an entirely new phrase that relates to this as a contrast. So this one is an internal contrast inside the sentence. Okay? This one says what came before is different than what came after. This one says that the conditions it's about to explain would lead you to believe that this is impossible. But it is not impossible. It is true. So, despite the advanced state of Cretanization, which would lead you to believe that nobody thinks, yet still there are people who think. So, this nevertheless is macro. It relates the two big ideas in the paragraph. This despite is micro, and it talks about despite the conditions of society which would lead you to believe this is impossible, yet still it is true. Yet still it is true. Okay? So, they are not repeat. It's not a repeat for emphasis. Both words are necessary to the structure of the sentence. Now we have another question, rather similar. The student is trying to figure out, I'm reading it from the screen right now because our printer is broken or isn't working. I am trying to figure out how the sentence below changes the meaning if I modify it in this way. The first sentence is as Levis wrote, it has a close bearing that has, on the concern that explains my emphasis. It has a close bearing on the concern that explains my emphasis. Let me write that down real quick. It has, has a close bearing on the concern that explains my emphasis. That's the sentence as Levis wrote it. Now the student wants to change it. It has a close connection with the concept that explains my emphasis. It has a close connection with the statement that explains my emphasis. It has a close connection with the reasoning that explains my emphasis. So, it has a close connection with the concept, statement, reasoning. Concept, statement, or reasoning. That explains my emphasis, etc. Let's see. I thought concern implied some emotional consideration, not necessarily supported by strong argumentation. Something like, I care for it. In the sentence, the concern that explains sounds as if it was really pointing strong reasons for that. Okay, first let's talk about the difference between close bearing and close connection. Connection means this. Can they see me? Yeah. Don't make this go away, though. If they can see me, I'm fine. Yeah. I don't need to see myself. Okay. Connection means this. Bearing means this. Bearing is more, I don't know. I don't know how to explain this. It's a feeling, it is a connotation. Connection is more neutral. Bearing implies a almost more causal, or it will have more of an effect. His book has an effect, has close relevance, but more than just connection. It interacts more. It's more interactive. But it is a very subtle difference. But you wouldn't use connection. If something has bearing on something, it's kind of an important connection. Not just, this is too loose and too equal, as opposed to one influences the other. So I don't know how to explain it, but it has a different feel. Okay, on the concern that explains my emphasis. Concern, it does have an emotional connotation, but it does not mean without strong argumentation. It just, for instance, concept, again, concept is too neutral. A concept is not good or bad. A concern is something you are a little bit worried about. So concern is much more appropriate and different. The fact that Levis is using the word concern means that it is something weighty, something he is worried about, something that is dangerous, something that is important. It is not just a concept. A concept could be how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. You can drink coffee and talk about concepts for fun, but something which is a concern, you need to take seriously. Statement is even less than concept. Statement is a simple declarative sentence. It's not a big problem. A statement is not a problem at all. Statement is just like a sentence. Reasoning, again, is much more like concept. It's cerebral. It's in your head. It's philosophical. It is not a practical concern. I can reason that maybe the water supply for my city is becoming poisoned. I can reason and do scientific experiments and assess when will people start to die. And that is reasoning, but it is more than reasoning. It is a concern. So concern means a practical problem that you must react to and take seriously with weight. All of these are too light and something you can drink coffee and talk about with no practical implication to your life.
Student is asking if bearing has to do with support.
Close bearing on the concern. What does he mean by support? Okay, we've had a question that I don't fully understand. The student is asking whether bearing means support. No. It's support is too specific. Too specific. I'll show you what support is. I'm going to say a statement. The Democratic Party in America is liberal. Okay, that's a statement. I'm going to support it by saying they support socializing medicine. They support, or they are in favor of increasing welfare. Welfare means giving government money to poor people. And they want gay rights. To be in the Constitution. Now, each of these statements supports this one. Also, each of these topics has bearing on the question of whether the party is liberal or conservative. So the fact that the answer to the question, are they in favor of socialized medicine, has bearing on the answer to this question, does not mean that it supports it or that it contradicts it. It has bearing because the answer If it is yes, we'll also tend to make this one yes. If it is no, it will have an effect. So it will affect the outcome of this question. Is the Democratic Party liberal? Well, we must look at many things which have bearing on the question. And the outcome of those supplemental questions will determine the outcome of this. So okay, sorry about that. We lost our internet connection. And we are very grateful to God that that didn't happen every 10 minutes during this class, because usually the computer crashes very frequently. So thank God it happened only at the end. So I think you pretty much got the idea. If something has bearing, its outcome will help to determine the outcome of the primary thing. And if it supports it, it means it's already said yes. Yes, this is true, therefore this is true. So bearing and support are not the same. Bearing could be negative or positive. Okay, if there are no more questions, we will sign off for the week, and I hope to hear from you next week for more questions, and we'll talk about some more of the book. Okay, thank you. See you later.